Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer quick match gameplay. This time around I am playing as Bretonnia against the Warriors of Chaos led by Debrew on the map Gorgazan. So right off the bat I did decide to do a different lore this time around. On my previous games of Bretonnia I've either run Lewin or Fanchantress. But post Fanchantress nerf I've been trying to test out Lewin more, but now normally I have dismissed Albric. I really don't like his special ability. The Wrath of Manon is pretty trash, especially in campaign. I see Bordeleaux itself as the worst of the three sub-factions for Bretonnia. But I decided to give Bordeleaux a bit of a shot because he does have an anti-large bonus, which is pretty cool, and he has some pretty nifty little bonuses to nearby units, charge bonus, and speed, which I thought was pretty cool. And so I wanted to give it a try and see how he performs. Plus, he is a little bit cheaper than Lewin, and he does have some. He is a very shock sort of oriented hero. You can see if you look at his abilities, he does have Deadly Onslaught. He has Heroic Killing Blow, and of course that Spirit of the Tempest, which means that he has a very hefty burst compared to Lewin, for example, who's much more of a cycle charging. Well, so is Bordeleaux, but Lewin is much more oriented towards kind of a slow, grinding playstyle, whereas Bordeleaux is very much get in there, do a boatload of damage, get out. I wanted to give it a shot. So I ran the core of my army here is Bordeleaux, alongside 2 units of Royal Pegasus Knights. The Royal Pegasus Knights, of course, are basically like normal Pegasus Knights, except they do have physical resistance, some slightly improved stats. They do have a bonus against large, which I think is going to be useful against Chaos, but more importantly they do have immunity to psychology, and they are immune to vigor, so in a long prolonged fight they will do very well, and of course they do have that 20% physical resistance as long as they're unbroken. Now, backing up Bordeleaux, I do have a Damsel of Life because Bordeleaux himself has no regeneration, and just to stiffen up my front line to keep my Pegasus Knights a little bit more alive. Pegasus Knights are very squishy as far as cavalry goes. They have very low armor and fairly low melee defense, so they can die very quickly if you don't babysit them and give them proper support. So I brought a Damsel of Life on a horse, coming in with Earthblood and Dwellers Below. And then alongside her I do have a Grail Relic, just to give some of my units immunity to psychology and that leadership bonus, because Chaos of course can be pretty heavy on those things. And then the rest of my force is a mix of men-at-arms with polearms and foot squires in the front line. One of the units over here on the far right is the Beast Slayers of Bastogne, and in the very back I do have the Holy Wardens of La Maison. These guys are not amazing against Chaos because they don't have armor piercing, but they have fairly high DPS, they have Frenzy, they have magic and fire damage, and they can tear through. Chaos does sometimes bring fairly cheap units like say Marauders, and against them these guys will do very well and just kind of help clear them up and allow my men-at-arms and foot squires to focus on more important units without actually need armor piercing. Now, then the final unit I brought is the Wardens of Montfort. These are around mounted yeoman archers. I had a couple hundred, 700 I think, or whatever it is that these guys cost. I think it's 700 that cost points left over, and so I brought them. They do have poison, which should help me kind of disrupt my opponent. They're fairly cheap. They can be a bit of a nuisance, a distraction, and just weaken my opponent, make them an easier target for my forces. So I think it's a slow-mo as we go over my opponent's army. My opponent did bring Kolek Suneater. He is large. He got a recent buff to his armor, so he's now very tanky against skirmishers, which beforehand, despite having Scaly Skin, I do believe it is, yeah, Scaly Skin, which gives him 25% missile resistance, he was still very susceptible to ranged fire. And so now he's much less vulnerable to that stuff. Alongside that, he did bring the Swords of Chaos, which are the Regiment of Renown. They will improve his tankiness even further if they get stay close to Kolek. And then he does have the Summoners of Rage, who are the Regiment of Renown Dragon Ogres. These guys just have higher stats to do magic damage, and which does mean that they'll bypass the physical resistance on my Pegasus Knights, for example. And they do have they have one cast of Chain Lightning. They're a very solid unit. They're not much more expensive than normal Dragon Ogres. So if you want the stats and have a little bit of gold to spare, they're definitely a very solid choice. My opponent's front line is pretty solid against Bretonnia. It's the majority of this is Forsaken. On the my left flank, my opponent's right flank over here, he does have the Mirror Guard, who are very tanky. They don't have the best of damage output. Their weapon strength is fairly low, but they do have very high melee defense. They have very high mobility for Chaos Warriors, and they're immune to psychology, so no terror routing them. And then over here on the right flank, it's anchored by Chaos Marauders, who are definitely my opponent's weak spot, and shortly I'm going to be moving my Holy Wardens to the right flank to kind of match them. In the back, my opponent does have the Aspiring Champions in the center, kind of anchoring his line with a bit of encouragement. And then on either flank, he does have Chaos Warriors with Halberds, just there to shut down any large units I might bring. So without further ado, kind of throwing things into full gear, I immediately push up my Wardens of Montfort, knowing that my opponent has nothing to really engage me with, and start peppering away with poison arrows, just doing a little bit of damage. Dragon Ogres do have, their armor's pretty pitiful, but they do have 25% missile resistance. But I'm just kind of trying to be a nuisance and force my opponent to make a move. And my opponent is, of course, just pushing in. His Forsaken won't do particularly well against Foot Squires, but at the same time, they won't do terrible against them, because Foot Squires' armor, 70 is a good armor, but it's not amazing. Great Swords, for example, have 95, and that does make quite a bit of a difference. That does mean that your bottom line for Great Swords, your lowest damage reduction, is almost 45%. Or sorry, almost 50%. It's 47.5% of the Great Swords, whereas for these guys, it's only 35% minimum reduction, which can be that is quite a bit of a difference. That means that about 15% more damage is going through, and that's before you consider the fact that these guys don't have as good of a 15 to 25% really more damage is going through. And that's before considering that these guys' melee defense is pretty atrocious. But I'm kind of cycling around with Bordeleaux and the Royal Pegasus Knights, looking for a weak spot. I don't want to Pegasus Knights, as I mentioned before, are very vulnerable to and squishy, so I don't want to get them caught by the halberds, because that will probably be game and they'll be dead. So I'm trying to get an angle on either Kolek or the Summoners of Rage, because these guys do have a very significant anti-large bonus. I do push straight into my opponent here, trying to get that charge bonus on my own units. The Foot Squire is trading fairly well with the Forsaken. As the Forsaken lose morale, these guys should do very well. Over here, I'm pushing the Holy Wardens into the fray, trying to get them onto the Chaos Marauders to melt them down. And the Airforce of Life's just kind of sitting here with the Grail Relic and support, waiting for opportunity. And now seeing a chance here, I do dive in on Kolek. I accidentally popped Rally, which was a bit of a mistake. Bordeleaux does not have Stand Your Ground, but he does have Rally, which provides just a leadership buff. On a fairly low cooldown, I do believe. It's about 45 seconds. But I immediately dive on Kolek, and you see how much damage that did. That did some very hefty amounts of work. Kolek's already down by over half his health, and as you can see, Bordeleaux hitting with that anti-large bonus is just absolutely annihilating the poor guy. With all his buffs going off, Bordeleaux is a very, very powerful lord. He's as far as just raw damage in a very short burst goes. So already Kolek is being forced to flee, and you can see the charge bonus on Albrecht is well over 100. So poor Kolek there is forced to flee. Now over here on the left flank, I was losing pretty heavily, and so what I did, I was like, cast the Dwellers Below. And I don't think it actually wiped any of my opponent's units, but it very nearly wiped these Forsaken. And more importantly, it does amazing amounts of work with these Mirror Guard. It really beats up on these Swords of Chaos, these Chaos Warriors with Albers. And while I did lose an entire unit of, or most, I think, of a unit of Pole Arms, and these Foot Squires, it was definitely a worthwhile trade as far as raw damage output goes. These Wardens of Montfort are beginning to run out of ammo, and they are tired, which is a bit of a problem. And you can see my line is being kind of wrapped up from one flank to the other. My opponent very decisively won this left flank, despite those Dwellers Below kind of tripling his units in exchange. I won the right flank pretty decisively. I'm kind of just moving the Grail Relic out of danger, and I still have a pretty strong linchpin here. I still have the Holy Wardens, the Beast Slayers, and the Men-at-Arms with Polearms here. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely, this was a bit of a miss-micro or accident here. I sent the Royal Pegasus Knights in against the Dragon Ogres. I'm not entirely sure what I was thinking here. Because I know I sent the other unit on against the Forsaken, just trying to rat off units. It's possible these guys were chasing a unit and simply forgot about them. They got destroyed. Albrecht did chase off Kolek, but Kolek did come back. I simply wasn't really able to pursue him. I didn't want to keep pursuing him, so I'm going to start bringing my troops back, trying to get on top of my enemy's units. Fortunately, these Beast Slayers of Bastogne are still alive and kicking. These guys have very high melee defense, and they will do very well against these large units like the Swords of Chaos. Unfortunately, Summoners of Rage are just trying to force path through my Beast Slayers, trying to get on top of my Grail Relic, but now I do dive into them with the Pegasus Knights, who are just going all in against my opponent here, and I do drop an Earthblood immediately afterwards, and with Albrecht in there buffing him up, these guys should do a pretty good job against the Summoners of Rage here. And Kolek, of course, still not in the field, still not in position to help. Over here you can see my Wardens of Montfort just still distracting these Forsaken, and they're actually, I think, cheaper than most of the units they were distracting, so that was definitely a bit of a win there. And that is that. Now, there's some pretty clutch moves there. I did manage to catch those, my opponent's units out on the left flank with a Dweller's Below. Dweller's Below is an incredibly powerful spell now. It's, in my opinion, of the reworked or buffed or those sort of spells, I do think that even compared to the new and improved Final Transmutation, Dweller's Below is just incredibly powerful. I think it's probably the strongest spell of the bunch that got upgraded, and it might just be, given that how fairly flexible and cheap it is, it only costs 17 Winds of Magic. I think that at the moment it's probably the most powerful damage spell available. especially, and it works against all sorts of units. It's not ideal against heroes, but against everything, any like not even 9-man squads, like trolls and that stuff, and much less 18 and up squads, they will annihilate them. So it's actually a very, very strong spell, and it's very cheap. Fate of Buna, for example, costs 16. Granted, it is a guaranteed hit, but it is still, in comparison to Bordeleaux, it's not that hard to land, and you can often catch multiple units with it, and it's just very, very efficient. And it obviously does much more damage to Fib, So because it is direct damage, so it actually, if you hit if you hit a unit with it, it'll actually affect all the units in or models in that unit, as in a separate replay with where I used dwarves with where I had dwarf warriors caught by it. I just realized that. So definitely a bit of a interesting thing there. Outbreak, I think, is pretty powerful. I definitely underestimated him as far as his just raw combat ability goes against lords like Kolek, and just that ability to just kind of dive in. He's definitely not good for supporting a prolonged engagement the way Lewin is, because he doesn't have regen and he doesn't have stand your ground, so he can't buff up that melee defense, but he has that immense charge bonus. He's capable of buffing units around him, and he just dishes out a lot of hurt, especially to large targets like Kolek. So he's definitely very much oriented towards that. And yeah, Holy Wardens of Maestral, you can see, actually performed very well. They just kind of jumped on those Marauders and melted them down. Foot Squires did okay, Beast Slayers did okay. The Pegasus Knights did pretty well, especially considering that by and large I was focusing on large units with them. I wasn't really focusing on squishy enemy targets. This is definitely a solid performance. The Wardens of Montfort, not too great, but at the same time most of these units are pretty well armored, and these guys were more there for harassment and support, so they definitely did that job pretty well. For my opponent, these Forsaken definitely did an immense amount of work. Forsaken are very strong, even against Foot Squires, because of the way armor works. Bretonnia just doesn't have many well-armored units at all, really. 80 armor is decent, but on their knights, for example. But even Pegasus Knights with 80 armor can get stripped down by Forsaken pretty quickly. And of course, the Chaos Warriors with Halberds and the Summoners of Rage largely beating up on these Pegasus Knights, and they did really well with that. So definitely a great game for my opponent. Well played. As usual, I do hope you guys enjoyed this replay. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any ideas on what I could do better, or what comps you'd like to see demonstrated, or what units you'd like to see used, be sure to post them. I kind of arbitrarily pick and choose what unique unit or not rarely used units I want to try out, and so yeah, if there's something you want to see specifically, then be sure to ask, and I'll do my best to run through. I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I appreciate you all for watching, and Wyvern out.